movement. He wrote entirely alone. He was from a country which had never before produced any writer who'd been heard of outside Scandinavia, and he was writing in a language which nobody knew, Norwegian. It was as though the theatre today were to be revolutionized by an Eskimo.
Anyone who wishes to understand me fully must know Norway. The spectacular but severe landscape which people have around them in the north, and the lonely, shut-off life, the houses often lie miles from each other, force them not to bother about other people, but only their own concerns, so that they become reflective and serious. They brood and doubt and often despair. In Norway, every second man is a philosopher. And those dark winters with the thick mists outside, oh, they long for the sun.
I think all writers are tremendously conditioned by their environment. I know that I am. And I think of Ibsen's environment. I think of those very stuffy little bourgeois middle-class homes full of antimacassars and aspidistras and no fresh air, all poised on these glacial fjords which are full of trolls and ghosts and ladies from the sea. And I think of some lines of Auden in which he says, the glacier knocks in the cupboard, the desert sighs in the bed, the crack in the teacup opens, alone to the land of the dead. And I think that's the kind of environment which Ibsen wrote in. And I think that the strength of his plays is that very realistic middle class set on the stage, but outside are all these strange, weird, magical influences.
How merciless the fjord looks today. Lying there so heavy, drowsy, lead grey with flashes of yellow reflecting the rain clouds.
The sun. The sun. I can't bear this. I can't bear it.
The storms in the north in winter, they grab you, carry you where they want. No point fighting them, no hope.
You said you'd come back for me in 10 years, like a troll.
Oh, those wild imaginings, I'll never be free of them. I feel it, I know it.
And we're all so horribly afraid of the light.
Every writer has not only his list of the greats, but also a small list of people who have been very influential and who mean something particular to them. And Ibsen is one of that small group for me. I think I've particularly been influenced by him. Not exactly influenced, but inspired by him. Because of the sort of two-way vision he has, both looking out into very large historical themes in the 19th century. One remembers that Darwinism was going on, evolution, Freud, of which he was obviously a precursor. So he looked outwards, but also in every drama, inwards, into the psyche, in a very, very intimate, very subtle way.
Success didn't come to Ibsen early. He was a failure till he was 36. He was largely self-educated. His father went bankrupt when he was 7. He had to leave school at 15 to earn his living as assistant to an apothecary. He studied at night to get into university. But he left university without a degree to take a job in a theatre as General Dogsbody, really. He had to keep the accounts, design costumes, write plays, and even direct them. His own plays failed miserably. His life was a failure. He applied for pensions that were on offer for writers and artists, but he was always rejected. He became an alcoholic, and when he was director of the National Theatre in the capital Christiania, it was a common sight at night to see his squat, bearded figure lying senseless in the gutter. A few years earlier, at the age of 30, he'd married Susanna Thoresen, the daughter of a clergyman. She was an emancipated young woman and a skilled linguist, and although she deliberately remained a background figure throughout their lives, it was her strength of character and belief in him that kept him going. Their son Sigurd said of his parents, "He was the genius, she was the character. She was his will, and well he knew it. And then when he was 36, his luck changed. He got a tiny state pension of £100 a year for life. And he decided that he'd turn his back on Norway and the theatre. He'd go abroad, and he'd never write any more plays. So he went to Italy, and he spent the next 27 years of his life until he was 63 in voluntary exile in Rome, Dresden, and Munich.
I crossed the Alps on 9th of May, 1864. Over the high mountains, the clouds hung like great dark curtains, and beneath these we drove through the tunnel. And suddenly, that marvelously bright light, which is the beauty of the South, revealed itself to me, gleaming like white marble. It was to affect all my later work, a feeling of being released from the darkness into light, emerging from mists through a tunnel into the sunshine.
At first he tried to write a big epic poem. He was a very fine poet. But after 50 pages he got stuck, threw it aside and rewrote it as a play. But as a play only to be read, not acted. He called his play Brand.
Stop this God's finger pointing. If I weaken now, I am damned tenfold. Henceforth, I shall fight unflinchingly for the victory of the spirit over the weakness of the flesh. The Lord has armed me with the blade of his word. Now I stand firm in my will. Now I dare. Now I can crush mountains.
Put your affairs in order and leave this place.
If the earth were to tremble, I should still remain.
Then your child will die.
My child? Wolf? My child?
Oh, wait, listen to me. There's no light or sunshine here. The wind cuts like a polar blast. The clammy mist never lifts. Your child is weak. Another winter here will kill him. Go, Brand, and your son will live. But do it quickly, tomorrow, if you can.
Tonight, today, now. Agnes, lift him. Let us fly south. Oh, Agnes, death is spinning its web about our child. Go in, lift him, wrap him warmly. It will soon be evening, and the wind's cold.
So merciless towards your flock, so lenient towards yourself.
Ibsen's career can be divided into 4 periods. First, the early years of failure. The plays nobody does now, even in Norway, except as curiosities. Second, the great epic dramas in the 1860s and early 70s, with lots of scenes and lots of characters, of which the 2 greatest, Brand and Peer Gynt, were written in poetry. Third, in the late 70s and early 80s, what are generally known as his sociological plays in prose. And fourth, in the 80s and 90s, the 8 great final plays which so bewildered his contemporaries. In that third period, Ibsen wrote The Pillars of Society, A Doll's House, Ghosts, and An Enemy of the People, plays which dealt with the kind of topical problems which people were arguing about in debating societies, on the correspondence columns of newspapers, and on street corners. No book had anything like the impact of A Doll's House.
We've been married 8 years. This is the first time that you and I, man and wife, have ever had a serious talk together.
You didn't expect me to drag you into all my worries. You couldn't possibly have helped me with that.
When I lived with Papa, he used to tell me what he thought about everything, and I took on his opinions. He used to call me his little doll. And he used to play games with me, just the way I played with my dolls. Then I came to live in your house.
Have you never been happy here?
I always thought I was, but I haven't ever been. No, I've had fun. You've always been very kind to me, Torvald, but this house is like a playroom. My children have been my dolls.
Oh, you exaggerate.
I'm giving you my point of view for once.
So, playing is over. We'll begin again. Now comes time to learn.
Whose time to learn? Mine or the children's?
Both, my dear Nora.
Oh, Torvald, you're not the man to teach me to be the right wife for you. And what about me? Am I fit to educate the children? You said yourself that you couldn't leave them in my charge. You're right. I have to educate myself first, and you can't do that for me. That is something that I must do for myself. That is why I'm leaving you. I'm leaving you now. Christine will put me up for tonight. Tomorrow I shall go home, to where I was born. It'll be easier for me to get a job there.
You've no experience of the world.
I must try to get some, Torvald.
You forget your most sacred duties. Your husband, your children, your position as mother and wife.
I have another duty. Equally sacred, if that is the word. My duty to myself.
I think he thought of marriage as that, like those stuffy little rooms, really, which he was longing to get out of, but couldn't himself. I think that's the interesting conflict throughout in Ibsen, is that in a way he was tied to the sitting room, in a way he was tied to all the bourgeois conventions that he despised, but really he longed to be a wild woman and shoot pistols and escape from it all. Ibsen always rather envied the dotty troll world outside the front door, which he never felt entirely part of.
Ibsen was very preoccupied with the fulfillment of the individual's destiny, whether the individual was male or female. And of course, in his time, it was quite a new thing to really consider that women ought to have the same right to fulfill their destiny as men. I mean, the Victorian notion of the dutiful wife who is serving her husband all the time is one thing. But to say that women have an equal right, as it were, to fulfill their destiny and be whatever they ought to be, was something quite new. Now, this actually, again, anticipates many of the views of psychologists later on. People like Jung, talking about self-realization. All the psychologists like Maslow and Fromm and people like this are preoccupied with some form of self-realization, self-fulfillment. Again, Ibsen was ahead of his time, some 50 years ahead of his time in this particular instance.
There are two kinds of moral laws, one for men and one quite different for women. In practical life, woman is judged by masculine law, as though she weren't a woman but a man. The wife in the play ends by having no idea what is right and what is wrong. Natural feelings on the one hand and belief in authority on the other lead her to utter distraction. A woman cannot be herself in modern society.
A Doll's House made Ibsen internationally famous. It was discussed and fought about as no play ever had been before. There were public demonstrations against it and for it. And privately, in the home, husbands could no longer assume that their wives would regard them as infallible gods. A Doll's House is the most influential play that's ever been written. And Ghosts had an equally powerful impact. It's about a young man, the son of a distinguished father, who inherits his syphilis.
When did this terrible thing happen?
That's just what I can't understand. I've never lived intemperately. Mother, you must believe that of me. I've never done that.
I don't believe it, Oswald.
And yet it's happened to me, this terrible thing.
It's not possible. You're just overworked.
That's what I thought at first, but it isn't that.
Tell me the whole story.
Well, I shall, yeah.
When did you notice it?
It was soon after the last time I'd been home and had gone back again to Paris. I began to feel the most violent pains in my head. It was mostly at the back of my head, it seemed. It was as though a tight iron ring had been screwed round my neck and right through my head.
Yes.
First, I thought it was the usual headaches I used to have when I was a child.
Yes, yes.
But I soon realized it wasn't that. I couldn't work anymore. I wanted to begin on a new painting, but it was as though my powers had failed me. It was as though I was paralyzed. I couldn't see anything clearly. Everything went misty in front of my eyes. And then I sent for the doctor, and he told me the truth.
People came away from these plays forced to rethink beliefs they'd never seriously questioned before. And this was something that no dramatist anywhere had achieved since Euripides the Greek over 2,000 years earlier. Shakespeare had never questioned whether a monarch ought to have absolute power, or whether virtually all the wealth and power should be concentrated into the hands of a few men. How could he have? He'd have been in the Tower at once. But Ibsen challenged authority in its every aspect. He changed the theatre from being a place of undemanding entertainment into a forum where burning topics of the day were debated with marvellous skill, and the theatre would never be the same again.
Ibsen anticipated many of Freud's ideas, especially the idea, perhaps, that we are governed by things from our remote past. Both Ibsen and Freud share the idea that childhood and the events of childhood are very important, and that you don't get away from past guilt very easily. Ibsen is obsessed with guilt in much of what he writes, and he would have shared with Freud the idea that you could never really lay the ghosts of the past. In fact, Mrs. Alving in Ghosts refers to ghosts as things which haunt one from the past, and Freud would have gone along with that completely.
I am frightened because there is in me something ghost-like from which I can never free myself.
What did you call it?
Ghost-like. When I saw Oswald and Regina in there just now, it was as if I saw ghosts. I almost think that we are all ghosts. All of us, Pastor Manders. It isn't just what we've inherited from our father and mother that walks in us. It's all sorts of dead ideas. And all sorts of old and obsolete beliefs. They are not alive in us, but they live in us. And we can never free ourselves from them. They lie as thick as grains of sand. And we're all so horribly afraid of the light.
These four plays of Ibsen's third period are usually described as his sociological plays, though it was a word he hated. He said his plays were about much wider issues than sociology. A Doll's House, he asserted, was not about women's rights, but about something much bigger, the need for everyone, be he man or be she woman, to find out who he or she is and to become that person. Ibsen, the cause of all this hubbub, meanwhile led the most conservative domestic life with his wife, free from any hint of scandal. As is so often the case with revolutionary writers, he dressed very conservatively, like a banker or a diplomat, though politically he remained always left-wing.
Ibsen was certainly quite a severely obsessional person. He was punctilious about his dress. He wore lace cuffs when nobody was wearing lace cuffs. He was terribly fussy about cleanliness. Everything neat and tidy, everything organized, a meticulous, very fussy man, and also rather withdrawn from other people. People thought he was proud and standoffish. That sort of person has to have everything under control. They don't like any feeling that anything might escape or be spontaneous. And it is one reason for being creative in a curious way, because if you create your own world, it's all under your control. You've got all the people, you can make them do what you want. You aren't involved with having relationships with real people with all that unpredictability that naturally goes with that.
I have been more of a poet and less of a social philosopher than people generally tend to suppose. My task has been the portrayal of human beings.
He was so aware of the weaknesses, the conflict in the human mind. I think he was the first dramatist, really, to be so aware of all the ghosts of relationships, actually. And he himself spoke of going to Rome and admiring one statue outside the Vatican, where he says the eyes of the muse, the statue of the muse, seem to look outwards and inwards at herself at the same time. Ibsen seems to me to do that he does look outward at some problem, such as the life of women. On the other hand, always there is the look into the soul, and that is where he is modern and timeless.
He now moved on to what one may call his fourth and final period, in which he dealt with the dark interior of the human soul. These later plays, which include several that many people now regard as his greatest, were much less popular with his contemporaries than the sociological ones had been. They confused even his admirers. Hitherto, he seemed to have been preaching the importance of ideals. But in The Wild Duck, he seems to be saying that ideals are only for the few, that most of us need illusions to keep on living, a life lie. And in his next two plays, Rosmersholm and The Lady from the Sea, he investigates the hidden forces that rule our lives.
Ibsen wrote Rosmersholm in 1886, and it marks a transition between these two great periods of his writing. It combines many of his strengths as a playwright and includes two classic Ibsen characters. Rosmer, the tormented, bewildered liberal, and Rebecca, a powerful, enlightened, new woman.
If you had the power to call Beata back to you, to Rosmersholm, would you?
I don't know. I can think of one thing only, of what was decided and done.
Begin to live now, Rosmer. You'd already begun. You'd freed yourself completely. You were happy and powerful.
I was, my dear. Then this night fell.
In the evening, how lovely it was to sit in the living room, helping each other, planning our lives again, living life again.
What we see in an Ibsen play is the revelation of truth, the reality of the characters, what really lies in their minds, and sometimes the origins of that go back to their childhood or beyond, in a very Freudian way. Now, since usually we can't stand facing the truth in our own lives, I think there's a great fascination and satisfaction, catharsis almost, in seeing it happen to a Hedda Gabler or to a John Rosmer on the stage. And of course, it is just the last few hours or days of the process.
I will never rise above it completely. There will always be doubt, questioning. I'll never taste again what makes life so sweet to live.
What do you mean, Rosmer?
To be happy, quiet, free from guilt.
Free from guilt.
How well she could connect. How carefully she could piece it all together. First, she caught my wavering faith. How could she have hit upon that? She did. And she grew certain. And then it was so easy for her to imagine what she imagined. Oh, those wild imaginings. I'll never be free of them. I feel it. I know it. Every now and again, they'll rise up and bring back the dead.
Like the white horse of Rosmersholm.
Before I write one word, I must know the character through and through. I must penetrate into the last wrinkle of his soul. Then, I do not let him go until his fate is fulfilled.
Stay seated. You too, Rector Kroll. I'll bring all to light. Rosmer, you are without guilt. I tempted Beata. I pushed her onto the desolate paths. Paths that led to the mill race. Now, both of you know it.
What did you tell her? There was nothing.
She came to know you were on the verge of losing the old blindness.
I was not at the time.
I knew you would soon see.
Well, what else? I want to know everything now.
Then, later on, I pleaded, I begged her to let me leave Rosmersholm.
Why want to leave at that time?
I didn't want to leave. I wanted to stay where I was. I said to her that if I got away in time, it would surely be best for us all. I let her know that if I stayed here any longer, anything might happen, whatever it might be.
Although Ibsen predates Freud, Rosmersholm is like a classic Freudian case. And Freud himself has written an absolutely wonderful paper on the play, which for me actually gets to its heart. He examines the moment when Rebecca is talking to Kroll and Rosmer, and trying to explain why she drove Beata to commit suicide. And she says, you think I was cool when I did it? I wasn't. I both willed and didn't will it. there are two kinds of desire, she says. And she obviously means the conscious wish, which was presumably to be nice to Beata, and to get on with her, and the unconscious one, to drive a great rift, in fact, the greatest rift between Beata and her husband. And Freud says, why? Why did she want to break up the relationship and to take Beata's place? Well, he says it's the Oedipus complex. And it actually does convince one, because if you take Rebecca's past, you find that she has had a love affair, almost certainly it's hinted, it's never actually stated, with Dr. West, who was given to us, presented as her adoptive father. So she's had a love affair with an older man, and she must have guessed that Dr. West had had a relationship with her own mother, who was a midwife. So she comes into the Rosmer home with that past, and immediately she sees the same situation, an older man, Rosmer, and the mother figure, a woman who actually can't have children but wants them. And so she drives the wedge between them.
You confess everything now, Rebecca?
Yes, Rosmer.
No, not everything.
What else should there be?
Did you not let Beata know that you must, of necessity, go somewhere else as quickly as possible? Because you and Rosmer...
I may have said something of that nature, yes.
And she believed this pack of lies. Sad, sick woman. She walked around believing this deceit, believing it absolutely to the bitter end. She never turned to me, not a word, ever. Rebecca, I can see it in you. You warned her against it.
In her head, she believed she had no place here. She was a wife with no children. She imagined it was her duty to you to give away her place.
And you did nothing to destroy her fantasy.
No.
You built it up, didn't you? Answer me.
That is how she understood me, I suppose.
Yes, she followed your desires in everything. So she gave away her place. How could you play this terrible game?
I believed there was a choice between two lives here, Rosmer.
You had no right to make such a choice.
How cold do you believe I am? Was I acting then under complete control? Am I so calculating? I can now stand here talking about it, but I was not the same then. There are two types of desire. That's human nature. Yes, I wanted rid of Beata one way or another, but I didn't think it would happen. Every step I took, every move forward, something screamed inside me, stop, no further, stop. But I could not let it be. I had to push a little bit more, just one step more, and then one more, and always one more. And it happened. That's how such things happen.
What will become of you after this?
My fate. It's not important.
Not a word of remorse. Do you feel none?
That is my concern. Forgive me if I alone deal with it.
And this woman lives under your roof, and you trust her. Were the dead to return now, were they to see this?
I think he knows all about ambition. He knows all about power as well as about sex. I rather suspect that in Rosmer's home, when Rebecca talks about the two motives, she may be referring to both power and sex. She must have got a kick out of being able to make somebody else commit suicide, as well as also wanting sexual fulfillment with the man that she'd chosen.
At the end of Rosmer's home, the audience sort of feels that the point of conscience with her is guilt over Beata. But that really isn't so. She shows astonishingly little guilt about having driven Beata to death. Her white horse, her troll, her ghost, is that unknowingly she slept with her father. So Freud observes that Ibsen has brilliantly brought together two different white horses, two different trolls, the destroyed first wife and the incest lying behind Rebecca West.
Then it began. It's frightened me, broken me, terrified. I will be all my life.
What began? Well, I want to understand you.
Desire. It came over me, possessed me. Wild.
Desire, what for?
For you. Stay, hear more.
You saying you loved me in a way
I called it love. It seemed like love. It wasn't. It was what I am telling you. Desire. Wild and possessing.
Is it you, Rebecca, sitting there telling me this?
Yes, Rosmer, help me.
Under this power, you took action, as you call it.
It rose in me like a sea storm. The storms in the north in winter, they grab you. Carry you where they want. No point fighting them, no hope.
And it swept poor Beata into the mill race.
Yes, it was a fight between Beata and me on the keel of a sinking ship.
But you were strongest here at Rosmer's home, stronger than Beata and me put together.
I knew you well enough to realize I could never get near you until you were free. Free in mind and soul. Free from all ties.
I don't know you, Rebecca. I can't work you out. You're a riddle. I am free now. You are before me. You are close to what you always wanted.
I have never been further away from it.
I asked you yesterday, begged you, be my wife. You cried. You were afraid. It cannot happen.
I cried because I was in despair.
Why?
Rosmer's home has stolen my power. My life had wings. Here they've been clipped. I'm confused. I once dared risk anything, but that time has passed, Rosmer. I can no longer act.
She's so overwhelmed with guilt that she can't, in fact, enjoy what she's actually brought about. Enjoy the desires, the fulfillment of the desires which she's been pursuing. And I think that's quite a shrewd bit of psychological observation. I mean, people do violent and nasty things, and then in order to achieve their ends, and then when they've got them, they can't enjoy them because of the guilt associated with what they've done.
When I was allowed to live here with you alone, quietly, you gave me all your thoughts, no secrets, every gentle feeling, delicate. I felt you think them. And a great change came, bit by bit. I barely noticed it, but in the end, it drowned me. My soul, drowned in the depths.
What is this, Rebecca?
The wild desire passed away. It left me. The passion calmed. I felt silence, peace of mind. Still as a bird on the rock, seeing the sun at midnight shining where I was born.
Everything you know, tell.
There isn't much else to tell. I felt love growing in me, great love, not selfish. Love content with our life.
Had I the slightest notion?
Best as it is. Yesterday you asked me to be your wife. I cried with joy.
Yes, Rebecca, that's how I understood
For a moment,
it.
yes, I forgot what I'd become. My old self came back. But it has no power anymore. I can't keep going.
What happened to you?
Your way of living. The Rosmer way of living. It's infected me.
Infected?
It's paralyzed me. I followed its laws and they've enslaved me. I don't know myself. Life with you refined my spirit, but...
If I dared believe that...
Oh, believe it. The Rosmer way does refine, but...
What?
It kills happiness.
Rebecca and Rosmer, obviously opposites, Rosmer, with his awareness of all the pictures of former hallowed Rosmers, the weight of tradition and orthodoxy, and this strange, mysterious Rebecca West from Finnmark, from the north somewhere. How can they marry and how can they consummate their love? The consummation is again an ideal. It's something that they hunger for. They yearn always for some absolute, but it's beyond normal human consummation. And so there is only one way in which it can be brought about, and that is by, in a very romantic way, the love-death, the Liebestod, the leap into the mill race. One can hardly imagine Rosmer and Rebecca going to bed and making love and getting up again in the morning and going on with their lives.
The romantic notion that love can only be fulfilled in death, of course, again, was topical or fashionable around those times. You've only to think of Wagner in The Flying Dutchman, in The Ring of the Nibelung, and in Tristan and Isolde. The lovers only consummate in death, as it were. I think it's a reflection of Ibsen's perpetual conflict about imagination and reality. I think that all his relationships with women, the ones that meant most to him, I'm not talking of his marriage, were imaginary relationships. I think they were bound to end in death or disaster.
Everything that I have written is most minutely connected with what I have lived through. Every new work has had for me the object of serving as a process of spiritual liberation. For every man shares the responsibility and the guilt of the society to which he belongs. That is why I once inscribed in a copy of one of my books the following dedicatory lines. To live is to war with trolls in heart and soul. To write is to sit in judgment on oneself.
As he reached 60, Ibsen seemed to be settling with his wife into a mellow old age. But now he found that fame is a powerful aphrodisiac. An Austrian girl of 18 named Emily Bardak fell in love with him, and he with her, and they agreed to go away together.
The effect on both Ibsen and Emily was considerable. Although she lived to be 84, she never married, and Ibsen, offered at last what he'd longed for all his life, found himself unable to accept it. The consciousness of this failure deeply disturbed him, and all his last 5 plays are blackly pessimistic.
Hedda Gabler is about not Emily, but Ibsen himself. Hedda has many of Ibsen's characteristics: fear of scandal, a longing for sex coupled with a fear of it. She's Ibsen in skirts. The play might be called Portrait of the Dramatist as a Young Woman.
But tell me, Hedda, what you felt for me then, wasn't that love? When you asked me those questions and made me confess my sins to you, wasn't that because you wanted to wash me clean?
No, not exactly.
Why did you do it then?
Do you find it so incredible that a young girl, given the chance to do so in secret, should want to be allowed a glimpse into a forbidden world of whose existence she's supposed to be ignorant?
So that was it.
One reason, I think.
You didn't love me then? It's just knowledge you wanted. But if that was so, why did you break it off?
That was your fault.
It was you who put an end to it?
Yes, when I realized that our friendship was threatening to develop into something else. Shame on you, Eilert Lovborg. How could you abuse the trust of your dearest friend?
Hedda, why didn't you do it? Why didn't you shoot me dead as you threatened?
I was afraid of the scandal.
Yes, Hedda. You're a coward at heart.
A dreadful coward. Luckily for you.
I think the idea of the woman acting as an inspiring figure, or the young girl acting as an inspiring figure, is again quite common amongst artists. It's as if they needed that stimulus to get them going, and also perhaps again reflects the fact that they don't have or very often don't, have very good relationships with actual people in real life. They need somebody who is both a real figure in one sense, a real person, but also who has the quality of inspiring them, and is therefore, in that sense, partly an imaginary figure. And of course, with a very old man and a very young girl, the young girl does partake of the imaginary to a large extent.
After writing Hedda Gabler, Ibsen returned to spend the last 15 years of his life in Norway. And there he wrote his last 4 great plays, in which he comes to a final account with himself. The Master Builder, John Gabriel Borkman, and When We Dead Awaken are all about men who have achieved fame and glory at the expense of a repressed emotional life. And they find that whatever you turn your back on gets you in the end. In The Master Builder, a girl of 23 comes to a man of 60 and reminds him of something that she says happened between them when she was 13.
It's remarkable how you remember all these little details.
Little details? You're a fine one. Was it just a little detail that I happened to be alone in the room when you came in?
Were you?
You didn't call me a little devil then.
No, I don't suppose I
You
did.
said I looked beautiful in my white dress, like a little princess.
And so you did, Miss Wagner. Besides, I felt so happy and free that evening.
And then you said that when I grew up, I would be your princess.
Oh, well, did I say that?
Yes, you did. And when I asked how long I would have to wait, you said you'd come back for me in 10 years like a troll and carry me off to Spain or somewhere like that. And you promised that when we got there, you'd buy me a kingdom.
Well, after a good dinner, one doesn't count the shillings. But did I really say all that?
Yeah. And you told me what this kingdom was to be called, too.
Oh, what?
You said it was to be called Oranja.
Well, that's a nice appetizing name.
I didn't like it. It sounded as though you were making fun of me.
Oh, I'm sure I didn't mean that.
I can well believe you didn't, considering what you did next.
What on earth did I do next?
No, that is a last straw. Have you forgotten that, too? I really think you might have remembered that.
Well, give me a hint and perhaps well...
You took me in your arms and kissed me, Mr. Souness.
I did?
Yes, you did. You took me in both your arms and bent me backwards and kissed me many, many times.
Oh, come now, really, Miss Bangle.
I think he felt perhaps regret about his life. He was invited by a young girl to join her in his last years. And I think that there's that conflict in him always between the early poetic dramas and his feeling about magic and mystery and the trolls and that bourgeois respectability. And I think that he felt that he'd rather opted for the bourgeois respectability and there was something more exciting going on outside, like the girl in The Master Builder. But if he went after her, he'd fall off the chimney and die, poor old thing. And so I think that was a sort of sadness in his life. He was, in a way, perhaps not a crazy enough dramatist for himself.
One thing about Ibsen, which might seem almost too obvious to say, is the sheer scale and scope of his writing. He wrote for 50 years, virtually from 1850 to 1900. And in that he wrote 25 dramas. It's Shakespearean in its range, and almost Shakespearean in the sort of span of vision, the spectrum of vision which it encompasses, from historical dramas that he wrote early to the kind of epic verse plays, Brand and Peer Gynt. The realistic studies of particular political problems, like the position of women, to the more internal, soulful tragedies, if you like Rosmersholm and Hedda Gabler. And then this curious final phase of Lady from the Sea and When We Dead Awaken and The Master Builder, where he doesn't seem so concerned to make a very well-made, coherent drama, but something almost like on the edge of a promontory, it seems to me. And it reminds me very much of Shakespeare's last plays, which are much less well made, let's say, than Macbeth or an earlier play, Cymbeline, Pericles, Tempest, where there is some vision which still needs to be expressed, but the artist almost can't be bothered to cover it up, to cloak it in a fine way, but just to say, this is my final vision, this is what I feel. It is at the very edge of expression, in other words. I cannot put it quite into coherent 5-act drama, but at the very edge of expression, here is my final vision.
Oh, if only the dream. How beautiful if I could wake up now.
Wish I had the power to wake you.
How merciless the fjord looks today. Lying there so heavy, drowsy, lead grey with flashes of yellow reflecting the rain clouds.
Alfred, you mustn't sit here staring at the fjord.
On the surface, yes, but deep down, there is the undertow.
For God's sake, don't think of that.
Oh, you think he lies out here, don't you, Asta? But he doesn't. You needn't fear that. Remember how strong the current is here. It's out to the open sea.
God.
That is why little Eolf has been taken so far. Far away from us now.
Don't talk like that, Alfred.
You can work it out. You're so clever with figures. 28 hours. No, 29 hours. Let me see.
Alfred.
But can you see the meaning of it?
Of what?
Of what has been done to me and Rita?
The meaning of it?
Yes, the meaning. There must be some meaning in it. Life, creation, providence. Have they no meaning, no purpose at all?
Oh, Alfred, how can we tell the purpose of these things?
No, indeed. Perhaps it is all haphazard, and things take their own course like a wrecked ship, drifting. Perhaps that's how it is. It seems so anyway.
What if it only seems?
Oh, perhaps you can give me a better answer. As for my part, I see none.
I think Ibsen is the first modern playwright, as it were, and he's still unsurpassed for his insight into human nature. This shy, withdrawn, obsessional man who didn't have very good relationships with other people was a marvelous observer and also a marvelous introspective person. I mean, he could look into his own soul and he could see there things which most people are really unconscious of. I'm sure that a great many of his plays are really personifications of his own internal conflicts.
I think Ibsen was always aware that there were no absolute ideals, that one could have ideals and they could hopefully evolve into other ideals and one could go on into the future, but that no particular set of beliefs were right for ever and ever. You know, he said that he'd written plays and always there were a crowd of people who rushed after him, but he'd always moved on somewhere else. And I think it's the same with the characters. They cannot be satisfied with less than some unattainable height, and because that is by its nature unreal, they have to die. This is the tragedy inherent in his plays.
Ibsen died in 1906 at the age of 78. He had found the drama a despised medium and left it as respected as it had been in Shakespeare's day. How had he achieved this revolution? Not simply by making the theatre a forum for debate. He'd shown that great tragedies could be written in ordinary everyday prose about ordinary men and women called Mr. and Mrs. Before Ibsen, stage tragedies had been in verse about kings and queens, or princes and princesses, or at the lowest Montagues and Capulets. The stage had been a platform on which mighty, larger-than-life figures moved. Ibsen turned it into a mirror in which the audience saw people like themselves, dressed like themselves, engaged in tragedies no less universal than Hamlet or Oedipus. And the subtle and complex relationships which he created demanded a new kind of acting, understated relationship acting, as opposed to grand solo performances, to the delight of a new kind of actor that was beginning to emerge towards the end of the century. Ibsen's characters are immeasurable and infinite. One is always discovering new subtleties in them. He showed that within the 80 pages of a play, one could do as much as the great novelists did in 600 pages. Ibsen is the Rome of modern drama. In the end, all roads lead from him and to him.
I shall never agree to identify freedom with political freedom. He who possesses freedom, otherwise than as something to be striven for, possesses something dead and meaningless. For by its very definition, freedom perpetually expands as one seeks to embrace it. If anyone stops and says, "Now I have it," he shows thereby that he has lost it.